Hi friends, I am Selan Jose. Welcome back to Geography, Resources and Development. Today we are going to discuss about different types of resources. We can classify resources into few categories based on different criterions. First criteria we used to classify resources, that is origin. On the basis of origin, we can divide resources into two categories: biotic resources and abiotic resources. Biotic resources and abiotic resources. Biotic resources means resources obtained from biosphere. Example, all living things like human beings, flora, fauna, wildlife, cattle world, all included in biotic resources. Second category is abiotic resources. Abiotic resources means resources which are composed of non-living items or non-living materials, non-living things. Examples of abiotic resources are rocks and metals. Is it clear? On the basis of origin, we can divide resources into two categories: biotic resources and abiotic resources. Categorization is based on exhaustibility. The nature of exhaustibility, we can divide resources into two again: renewable resources and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources means the resources which renewable. The word resource renewable means reproduce. See, through different natural processes, chemical process or a mechanical process, the resources will renew or reproduce by the nature itself. Example: solar energy, wind energy, wildlife, forest are better examples of renewable resources. That means that here resources are replenished or reproduced by the nature. Clear? See, this is the first categorization. Then again, we can divide resources based on the same nature. So flow resources or a continuous resources we call, because it is a continuously reproduced by the nature. It's clear. Then next categorization is non-renewable resources. Here, replenishing capacity or the time to reproduce, it is a long period, millions of years it will take to reproduce. Some resources which reproduce with a long period of time. It needs long period of time. Technically, it is not possible to use by one or two generations. Millions of years it will take. So here, there is no chance for renewing. So here resources are, when we use that resources, it will end completely, exhaust completely. See, example, fossil fuels and minerals are the examples of renewable resources. Is it clear? Here, once again, we can divide resources, non-renewable resources into two: recyclable and non-recyclable resources. Some resources like metals we can recycle, we can change its properties or we can change its shape, size and all. Then we can use the same metal into further use. At the same time, non-renewable, another example of non-renewable resources, that is fossil fuels. Once we used it, will never retain. That means it is not possible to recycle. Is it clear? These are the classification based on exhaustibility. Based on exhaustibility, we can divide resources into two categories. They are, first one, renewable resources, and second one, non-renewable resources. Clear? See, the third categorization is based on ownership. On the basis of ownership, we can divide resources into four categories: individual resources, community resources, national resources, and international resources. First one, individual resources. Individual, from the caption itself, we can define what is individual resources, what is community resources, and what is national and international resources. See here, individual resources means that resource owned by a single person or an individual. Farmlands, small farmlands are owned by farmers. It is an example of individual resources. Water in the well, which is located in a farmland, it is an individual resource. Similarly, the resources which are owned by a An individual is termed as individual resources. Any example you can take from the ownership. Is it clear? Next is community owned resources. Community owned resources, it here the ownership is not vested into one person, not confined to one person. Then who have ownership? The ownership is shared among the members of the society, members of the community. That is known as community owned resources. Here example, public park, public well, then playground, panchayat playgrounds are there in our panchayat areas. That is an example of community resources. The ownership is the whole community have equal ownership. Clear? Then playgrounds, burial sites, then picnic spots. These are the examples of community resources. Next is the national resources. Technically, all the resources which is seen in a country, inside the political boundary of our country, is known as national resources. Suppose one person have 100 hectares of land, then government plan a project, a railway expansion project, they want to install rail on that land. Then definitely government have a right to take that land for installing railway lines. That means that technically all the resources which is seen inside the political boundary is owned by the government, national property. At the same time, we have a pay revenue against it, against that land or property to the government. That is why we have got a temporary ownership on it. That is individual resources. Here national resources means the resources which is owned by the nation. Is it clear? Then forest, wildlife. Examples: forest, wildlife, water resources which is seen inside the country, and that oceanic regions also owned by the nation up to 12 nautical miles. 1 nautical mile is almost having 1.8 kilometer. Sorry, 1.85 kilometer. 1 nautical mile is equal to 1.85 kilometer. That means the total nautical miles means around 22 kilometers. That also that oceanic area also owned by a nation's property. Is it clear? Then next is the international resources. What do you mean by international resources? See, the resources which is seen beyond the national boundary. Is it clear? Beyond the national boundary. That means the oceanic resources which are located beyond 200 nautical miles. It is international. It is the ownership is controlled by some international agencies. Here ownership is controlled by some international agencies. That is an example of international resources. And other resources which is seen in polar regions is also an example of international resources. I think it is clear. Basis of ownership, we can divide resources into four. First one, individual resources, community resources, national resources, and international resources. Okay. See, the final categorization is on the basis of status of development. Again, we can divide resources into four categories: potential resources, developed resources, stock resources, and reserve resources. Potential resources, developed resources, stock, and reserve resources. See, first one, potential resources. Potential resources means that resources which have a potential to satisfy human needs, but at the present time we have no technical knowledge to explore that resources. Maybe we have a knowledge but we didn't start uh, to explore or utilizing that resources. Is it clear? Example, we all know how to convert solar energy into electricity, and we also know the technology to generate electricity from wind energy. In Gujarat and Rajasthan, we have enormous potentiality to produce or generate wind energy and solar energy. But till now, we didn't start exploiting in a huge quantity. Is it clear? Then next is Developed resources means the resources which are already survived, and we know the quality and quantity of resources, how much resources available, and how much quality that resources has, and it is everything is determined for exploitation or utilization. The development of resources depends on the technology and the level of feasibility. Is it clear? Resources, we measure its quality and quantity, and it is ready to exploitation, ready to utilization. Based on our technical knowledge, we can start. See, next is a stock resource. Stock resource means materials which are seen in our environment, which have a great potential to satisfy our needs. But we don't have appropriate technology to access these materials. Clear? That is stock resource. We call it as a stock. Example of stock resources that we know, water is a compound of two gases, hydrogen and oxygen. We know hydrogen have a great potential to produce huge quantities of energy, but we don't have a appropriate technology to extract that energy from hydrogen. But in future we will maybe. Is it clear? That is stock. Reserve resources. Here we know how to produce a hydroelectricity from that water which is stored in the dam, but we don't use that water for producing hydroelectricity now. We are keeping that resources for future use. It is known as reserve resources. Final one is reserve resources. Reserve resources means we know how to produce energy from a resource, or how to use that resources for human purposes, but we don't use that resources now. We keep that resources for future generation or future days use. That is known as reserve. Example, we keep water in resource or dams for summer days for producing electricity. That is an example of reserve resources. Is it clear? These are the classifications based on status of development. First of all, potential resources. Second one, stock resources, developed resources, reserve resources. These are the four categories. Okay.